Hey, good to be back with you here as we travel down the road. We're going to get a chance to visit with individuals about their race for state representative in Texas. You might ask why? Well, because it's playing out nationally when it comes to some of the issues that are in front of the United States Supreme Court. Also, we're going to get a chance to visit with you about the NFL players that have been suspended. We'll talk to one of the individuals that represents the players, or not those players, but is pushing to make sure all NFL players get vaccinated. We'll talk about that as well today. But Pete Smith joins us right now. Pete is a senior researcher for the Center for Responsible Lending, which means that he knows a little about finance and a little about how you deal with your checking account. Let's bring him in. Pete, good to have you coming down the road with us.
Nice to be here with you, Joel.
You know, first off, I got to ask you this, Pete. How do you get into this line of work? What told you, let's go do that for a living?
Well, I was fresh out of college and decided that I wanted to do something that was kind of socially positive. I had a math degree. I had a little bit of experience with programming, and there was a research position open in Washington, D.C. with the Center for Responsible Lending. I really didn't know much at the time, and I've been there for 16 and a half years now. So it was a good decision.
So it worked. That's the key. It worked. What is the Center for Responsible Lending? What do you do?
So we're a nonprofit policy and research group. We're affiliated with a credit union called Self-Help Credit Union, and the credit union is about 40 years old. The research and policy arm, CRL, came officially into being in 2002, and I came on board in 2005. Essentially, what we do is we analyze data, we reach out to state partners and other constituencies, all in the name of protecting vulnerable folks against the abuses of the financial system.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead, Pete.
Oh, no. I was just going to talk a little bit about the issues that we've focused on over the years. We took a pretty big stand against subprime lending and had spent a lot of time predicting the foreclosure crisis that unfortunately came to pass. We spent a lot of time advocating against payday lenders and other kind of unscrupulous, underregulated lenders that take advantage of folks with a special focus on communities of color and other vulnerable communities.
Well, for my own personal bank account and the stocks that I'm involved in, I wish they would have listened to you, because when all things went to heck, and I could use different words in 07 and 08, I mean, clearly they needed someone with your level of expertise. I want to talk about Capital One. That's one of the reasons that we called you. It's America's 6th largest retail bank, and it announced a complete end to all overdraft fees and non-sufficient fund fees, and some of the fees that banks try to get out of you. Give me your take on all of this, Pete.
Well, I'd say that while it seems like overdraft fees have been around forever, they really are a fairly new revenue model for banks. Popped up in the mid 2000s, basically, and it's been such a profitable revenue model for banks that I think they've kind of taken it and run with it. It's always been an unpopular product and an unpopular practice, and we're finally starting to see banks think carefully about what they're doing and the ways that they're either honoring or alienating their customer base with their policies.
So let me play devil's advocate a little bit. Speaking as someone who in his 20s knows what it was like to get, not a bounce check, never that happened, but know that there wasn't enough money in there to take care of the check, and then cross your fingers and hope you get that next check in there as quick as you can. But if you're the bank, you're basically borrowing money to take care of some of this. And if you borrow money, normally you get interest, which they would say is the fee. Why is that a problem?
Well, so if it were interest, it would be a much simpler affair. Essentially, these overdrafts are generally paid back within 1 to 2 days. And because it's the bank repaying themselves with the customer's money, they have immediate access to money that's put into the account. If there were, if a $35 fee were considered interest, it would be in the 4 to 5 digit interest range, which no one would appreciate. No one wants to see APRs of 1,000%. So if it were classified specifically as interest, it would be pennies on the dollar for the number and the amount of fees that people are incurring.
Let's go back to the bounce check, though.
Sure.
So I send Pete Smith a check for the bet that we had on the Vikings Lions game, which I'm still pouting about, Pete, by the way. And that check bounces. Now the bank's got to go through a process of sending word out, making sure a process of making sure that there wasn't enough money to pay in that account. Isn't time worth something as well, Pete?
The reality is that it may be worth something, but it's worth far, far less than $35. That is far more than covers the bank's expenses. That's why I call it a revenue model rather than just simply a fee. Banks have changed their policies to attract high-level depositors. They've installed free checking, which also seems like that's a loss leader also for them. But overdraft fees have allowed them to do that. Unfortunately, what overdraft fees do is they take money from the people with the least money and they kind of redistribute it to the folks who are getting free checking, who are kind of near the top of the heap, the high deposit individuals that banks want to attract with things like free checking.
Okay, so let's talk in particular about Capital One,
Sure.
Sixth largest retail bank. And it appears in the top 10, they're the only ones that pulled the pin on this revenue
Right.
model that you're
That's
talking
right.
about. What will that mean for them business-wise?
Well, we hope that it will mean a renewed confidence among their consumer base. We hope, people will make a choice to bank with them. But moreover, we hope that other banks will follow their lead. We have seen institutional change over the past 5 years, I'd say. Some banks have given up the NSF fees. Some banks have given up some of the more kind of egregious, some banks were charging a fee for every day that you were under zero, even if you weren't having any transactions. So if you can imagine being a person who was waiting for their paycheck and had overdrafted on Sunday and now was being responsible and not having any more transactions from Sunday to Friday, they were still charging $7 a day at most, or sometimes even more, in fact. And we called that a sustained overdraft fee. So the point being that there's been reputational risk, there's been institutional change over the past 5 years. We're glad to see it. We hope it continues. None of it is going to add up to the regulatory change that we need, though.
So I want to talk about laziness. In particular, I want to talk about the laziness of a Joel Heitkamp. Okay, so I've had the same bank account since I was in my early teens. I went to work for somebody. They were paying me a paycheck. Didn't really, it wasn't a lot of money. It was just to teach me about finance, which obviously it never did, because that money went into an account. And everything that I received working-wise, I got to understand, I'm 60 years old now. And so this was pre-direct deposit. I'd get these checks, I'd write on the back of them, I'd mail them to my bank, those type of things. That bank, it turns out, is not always a good actor. I don't want to say what the bank is, but quite frankly, it involves horses and a stagecoach. But I should be out of that bank. They've gotten better. In fairness, they cleaned up their act, but you remember how this all played out nationally. Now, one of the reasons I didn't, Pete, was laziness. Those people that I pay directly, I didn't want to sit there and go through the process of saying, well, this is my new bank account and this is how you go about it. And, oh, by the way, I need a new card. And, look at those employees that I've known for years that really weren't part of the problem. And, just sheer laziness. A Capital One deserves my business. I mean, how hard is it to transfer an account that you've had for years, you have direct deposit, all of that, to a new bank? How hard is that?
I don't think it's very hard at all, honestly. And I'll admit that I have banked with various institutions over my adult life, and I have changed institutions, and some of it was based on practices like this. I think it took me a day of annoying, conversations on the phone, waiting on hold with folks at either bank. But I don't think it ought to be as daunting as you make it seem. I think maybe within a week you get most of the things lined up. You get your card in the mail. You get yourself set up. But I do think it takes some doing, and it takes some advocating on behalf of yourself. Many of the biggest financial institutions in the world would love it if we were all just lazy. But I think when we realize that we want to make a change and we realize that there's a place offering a better alternative, I think we owe it to ourselves to get out there and make the change. Okay, what about the money? Because here's the truth. I have money in my account now. That's not a problem like it was in the past. When I was 21 years old and had 2 kids, was wondering how I was going to be able to afford diapers. That was a whole different era of my life. So the money that I have in my account is really theirs to be at play. And so, how big of an interest factor is that? And by this, I mean, look, if let's say I've got 50K or 30K in my bank account, that's money that's in their hands. That the more I leave it there, the more money they're going to make, is it not? Absolutely. I highly recommend looking into the ways that financial institutions invest your money. And we saw a lot of past few years kind of move your money campaigns, encouraging people to do just that and think about how they invest their money. And all financial institutions may seem like they're the same, but if you look into it, you can find some folks are using the money that is invested in the institution to develop the community. There are community development credit unions. In fact, the Center for Responsible Lending is associated with Self-Help Credit Union, which is itself a community development credit union. There's a lot of these around the country, but moreover, I just would recommend people look into it, just learn and be educated about what their institution does with their money. Yeah, good advice, Pete. In other words, get off my duff and do the work. So thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. Absolutely. Nice to talk to you, Joel. You bet.